All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Welcome to day one of the Writers Workshop. I think we're still waiting on one or two more people, but I don't want to wait for too long, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully, they'll join us in a couple of minutes. So basically, today, day one, it's just going to be a brief introduction to creative writing. We're going to talk a bit about plot holes. We're going to talk a little bit about developing characters, and basically all the tools that you need as a creative writer as we get further along within this week. But before we get into that, let's do some introductions. So I'm looking through all of you guys' faces on my right-hand screen, and I don't think I know any of you, so that's pretty surprising. Usually in my classes, I know a few more people. So I guess we can just go through one by one and do some introductions, just so I see people smiling over there, just so I know you better and everybody else gets to kind of meet everybody. So I guess I'm not going to spotlight everybody, so I guess I'll go first as well, just so you guys know a little bit about me and who I am. So my name is Emma. My pen name is Emma Victoria. If you read any of my books, or technically if you read my second book, that's the name I have on there. I'm in 10th grade, a sophomore. I am 15 years old, and I live in San Jose, California. My favorite book, I actually don't have a favorite book. I'm pretty into the dystopian genre. I read a lot of fantasy, but you know, Harry Potter is always a favorite. I also like the Hunger Games, so I basically like a lot of books. And then let's talk a bit about my books, I guess, since I have that on my next slide. So on the far left, I have Diary of the Gold Rush, and I actually began writing that one in 4th grade. So it's pretty funny because I bet a lot of you guys are around 4th grade-ish age. So I started writing that book when I was 4th grade. When I was 4th grade, when I was about 9 years old. I actually started writing it in the middle of math class in school because I was bored, and somehow I just started writing, and a year later I published that book, and that is this one. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but that's Diary of the Gold Rush, and that was published in 2016. In the middle, I have a Nightingale, which is my most recent book. I started writing that in May, I believe, of 2020, so a couple of months ago. And I finished that, I edited it, I formatted, and I self-published that just a few months ago, I believe in October. So that is a dystopian novel. I recently just gotten back into creative writing, so I actually wrote that after I took a break for like 5 years because I was busy with all my school stuff. So that was my second book, and there's a giant question mark on the far right, but that's just to take the place of my book that I'm working on right now. Actually, it's going to be a trilogy. It's going to be a futuristic fantasy book, which I will potentially talk about later. But that's basically a little bit about me, about who I am, and some of my books. So let's see if I can go back to the previous slide. Google Slides will work today. Cool. So does anyone else want to go ahead and introduce themselves? Just, I guess, go over all the stuff here. Just say your name, your age or grade, location, and favorite book, and any creative writing experience you have. Does anyone want to go first? See if anyone is willing to go first. Okay, we have some awkward silence. That's okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and call on random people, I guess, based on my list that I see on the right. So the first person that I see is, let's start from the bottom, actually. So the last person I see is Emma. So wow, we share the same name. Do you want to go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself?
My name is Emma, and I'm a 6th grader, and I'm in California, and my favorite book is The Fault in Our Stars, and I guess I have some creative writing experience.
Yeah, that's cool. Actually, I haven't read Fault in the Stars or Fault in My Stars, Our Stars. I don't know. I've heard of it. It's apparently a pretty good book, so I should probably read that. It's on my to be read list, so I'll definitely get to reading that someday. All right. It's very nice to meet you. It's super cool that we have the same name. All right. Next person I see is Annie. So Annie, do you want to go ahead and say a bit?
My name is Annie. I'm in 4th grade. I live in California. My favorite book is the Harry Potter series. And I only wrote a little bit of books, but I still wrote a little bit.
Yeah, it's cool. I remember I read through one of your little pieces of creative writing. It was super cool. It's super nice to meet you too, Annie. All right, next person I see is Olivia, right in the middle.
I live in Victoria. I don't really have a favorite book because I like lots of books. And I don't exactly write books, but I read a lot of books, kinda, and I do write in class.
Yeah, that's cool. I remember I never started creative writing until 4th grade, and that was just because I was bored in school. Like, I didn't take any classes whatsoever. So I remember I wrote a lot of poetry, just like school projects. I mean, I liked it, but essays are not my favorite. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate as well, especially as you get older, you have to write a lot of academic papers. But yeah, it's cool. You like, well, yeah, no favorite books, same as me. Explore a lot of books, it's super cool. All right, last person I believe is let me see, who's Houston? Sorry if I'm saying
It's pronounced Hausen,
Houston. All right.
and my name is Hausen. As said, I'm in 4th grade. I live in Texas, and my favorite book is, well, I don't have a favorite book because I read a lot of books and I like a lot of books. And my creative writing experience is basically only the stuff I do at school.
Yeah, that's super cool. I know a lot of us have like different ranges of like writing abilities. I know some of you guys are a bit more experienced than others, and that's like totally fine. This class is basically just very basic beginner level, I guess. But of course, like you can be a totally advanced writer and still take it. It's covering basic fundamentals, and it's pretty cool that we're all starting in the same place, so we're not like on completely different levels by the end of this class. All right, so I guess that is it for now. I think we're still missing one person unless I cannot see them on Zoom. So we're just gonna go ahead and get into the goals of the Writers Workshop. So I came up with a set of goals, so just so you guys can see what I'm like hoping that you'll learn by the end of this class. So the first one is just to gain fundamental knowledge of creative writing, including but not limited to the key elements of a story. We're gonna talk about that today. Conflicts, character development. We're going to talk a bit about outlining, basically plotting a little bit. So basically a little bit of everything that goes into creative writing. I also hope that you guys can gather some story ideas for your own writing project. I know the younger you are, the more awesome ideas you have. I'm kind of old now, so my imagination isn't as great as it once was, but I'm sure you guys have so many really cool ideas, so I'm hoping you guys can definitely do that. And the last goal is that you guys can start writing the first chapter of your short story or novel. That's actually scheduled for the end of this week, or I guess that's Wednesday/Thursday. So don't worry too much about that yet. I'll definitely like walk you guys through the entire process. So today's agenda, we're going to basically be doing 3 things. First thing is just go over basic what is creative writing. You obviously can't go too deep into something that you have no idea what it is. And then we're going to go ahead and talk about the plot hill. I'm pretty sure you guys are about like 4th, 5th, 6th grade-ish. And I think I learned the plot hill in school when I was about 7th grade, I believe. So some of you guys might know it, some of you guys might not, but we're just gonna like go through it real fast, just so everybody's on the same page. And then after we do that, we're going to do a brief introduction into genres and characters. So pretty fun. All right, so before we get started, of course, what is creative writing? So this is the dictionary definition, copied and pasted straight off of Google, and it says it's writing, typically fiction or poetry, which displays imagination or invention, and it's often contrasted with academic or journalistic writing. So I don't know about you guys, but like I mentioned before, I am not the best at writing essays. I just don't really like analyzing stuff that's already been written. I'd rather write my own. So when I read this definition, I'm pretty like happy with it. I know like it's not an essay. You're not doing tons of research. So it's actually pretty different from essay writing. So I know some of you guys might like essays, some of you guys don't. So that's basically the definition, I guess. And of course, my definition, I tend to simplify everything, but I just define creative writing as putting the stories in your imagination onto paper and potentially giving it to others or sharing your stories with the world. So before we actually, like I've been saying that so much, but before we actually get into what we're going to be doing today, I thought I'd share some of the terminology that's fairly common in the creative writing world. When I started creative writing again just a couple months ago, I joined a few communities and I had no idea what was going on since I didn't understand any of this. So I'm just going to go through it real fast. So when I use this terminology in the class, you'll kind of know what it means. So the first one is WIP or WIP or whatever you want to call it. It stands for work in progress. So it's basically the story that you're working on at the moment. You can have multiple, but most writers just have one main one that they're working on and a few side work in progresses. Second one is MC, which basically stands for main character, your protagonist, which we'll talk about later. We have SC, which is side character. I almost said South Carolina because I'm still in my 5th grades didn't mind doing states. Next one is OC, which basically stands for original character. This is like any character that you make. It's not somebody else's character like in a movie or TV show. This is the character or characters that are completely original that you made up. The next 3 are basically terms to describe types of writers. We have planner, pantser, and plantser. They are super weird names. I don't know how people came up with them, so don't ask me. But a planner is basically what it sounds like, one that kind of plans everything out before they write it. A pantser is one that writes without planning anything. So that was kind of me on both of my books that I published. I literally woke up one day and decided I was going to write a book. I had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it out. So I guess I was a pantser in that scenario. I'm more of a planner now, but that's basically the difference between the two. And then we have a plantser, which is a mix of both. So you plan a little bit, but for the most part, you're still kind of just guessing as you go. And then the last one is TBR, which basically stands for to be read. And this is most likely just a list of books that you eventually want to read. So, okay, we're actually getting into it now. Yay. So the first thing, definitely the plot hill. So this is a tool that's commonly used to organize a story into certain segments. And another vocab check, this one actually occurred pretty close to the last one we just did. So basically, let's just go over some basic vocab so we all know what we're talking about. So first of all, what is a plot? So a plot is a series of events that basically make up your story. And then the next one, what is an outline? So an outline is a method used by writers to plan out their plot. There's a ton of different outlining methods that I made a specific class for. And as a writer, one of the hardest things that you'll be doing is to figure out what outlining method works best for you, just because there's so many and it's really hard to kind of figure out what fits your writing style the most. But for this class, for the sake of actually, writing and not spending 5 days trying to figure out what outlining method works, we'll be focusing on the plot hill, which is kind of a type designed to fit any type of story, regardless of if you're a beginning or an advanced writer. I know a ton of advanced writers that prefer to use the plot hill, and it also works pretty well for beginning writers, super easy to comprehend, so we're just going to go with that one. So here's a basic diagram of the plot hill. It looks kind of like a weird triangle of sorts, I guess a hill if you want to call it that. So we have the opening, exposition, it's kind of flat. We have the conflict, the inciting moment is pointing at the little slope right here. Going up the hill, we have rising action, we have climax at the top, falling action going down, and resolution at the very bottom. So I'm just going to go through each one just really fast so I can explain each one like more in depth. And also, I forgot to give a heads up before, but I decided to use Cinderella as an example. So I apologize to all of y'all who aren't interested in Disney as much anymore. I just chose Cinderella just because it's a super common story and everyone pretty much knows what's going on in there. So anyways, going back to the plot hill, the exposition. So this is like, again, the really flat part at the beginning. So this is usually regarded as the boring or slow part of the story. This is basically the introduction, I guess. It introduces the character, introduces the setting. You get to know your protagonist, which is another word for main character. And you also tend to get to know your antagonist, which is like the bad guy or the bad character. So in my cheesy example of Cinderella, this would just be the basics, introduces Cinderella and her family. So the next part is the inciting incident. So I did not have room to put the plot hill, but if you remember, it kind of like slopes up like eventually from the exposition. So like exactly at that point where it starts sloping up, we call that the inciting incident. And this is basically an action or realization or the thought that kind of kicks off the conflict in the story. So if you recall what I just mentioned, the exposition is usually really boring, but in order to keep readers engaged who actually want to read your book, you probably want to start introducing action and conflict sooner than later. So that's why the inciting incident kind of exists. So just something here, this should, most times make sense. Characters do things for a reason. My example that I usually use here is let's say I'm writing a story of I come up with the cheesiest examples, but I'll just say my example is that I'm writing a story with a princess that is searching. Well, she's going on a adventure to find a dragon. Okay, there you go. It's super cheesy, but bear with me. All right, so when your inciting incident for that example would probably be when the said princess starts on the adventure. But again, it should make sense. Characters don't do things generally for people or characters do generally do things for a reason, so it doesn't really make sense if your princess just wakes up one day and decides that she's going to leave everything behind and go on a adventure. So there should be some kind of reasoning behind things. For example, maybe the princess's brother or parents are sick and the dragon somehow can cure it, or maybe there's a war going on and the dragon holds like her magic wand or something like that. So just make sure there's a reason behind everything that your characters are doing. So in Cinderella, example would be when she receives an invitation to the ball. So the next one is the rising action, and this is mainly where all the action and drama and conflict takes place. So this, the main purpose of the rising action is just to build tension and suspense, and it also modifies or introduces the conflict depending on how much you already introduced in your first two sections. So there's 4 main types of conflicts. I'm pretty sure there's more, but most of them are irrelevant, so we're just going to talk about the 4 right here. The first one is man versus man, and that is kind of self-explanatory. You have person A, person B. They get in a fight, they use swords, they punch each other, just physical, I guess, confrontation. Second one is man versus nature, also kind of self-explanatory. You have a person that's battling somehow against an earthquake, against a tsunami, a flood, so basically stuff that you generally can't control. Next one is man versus himself, and this one is kind of confusing, but if you actually think about it, I guess you have like a voice inside your head, which I guess people call your mind. Okay, I know that, but like so I guess an example would just be a person that's kind of battling his or her inner voice in its mind that's kind of telling him to do one thing, but he wants to do another thing. So it's just kind of, wow, just kind of internal conflicts. All right, the last one we're going to talk about is man versus society, and this one is most common in dystopian novels, which we'll talk about in our genre class sometime this week. But this is also kind of self-explanatory. You have a person who's kind of exiled from society. It can be basically any reason. Maybe he looks different, maybe he thinks different, just any reason why. He's kind of kicked out of society and he has to figure out a way to kind of get back in society or kind of battle against this community of people. So again, those are the main 4 types of conflicts. There's probably more. If you Google types of conflicts, it'll come up with a whole giant list, but these are the most common ones I see in writing generally. In my example, the fairy of Cinderella, the fairy godmother comes and transforms random objects into magical ones. And actually the rising action should take about half to 3/4 of your story. So this is actually pretty surprising because you would think the most exciting part, which is the climax, we'll get there in just a second, would take the most time and the most words or length in your story. But in general, it is actually the rising action that takes the most, I guess, the most pages or words in your story. So as promised, we are now at the top of the plot hill. So rising action was going up, and now we're at the top of the triangle hill, whatever you want to call it. And that is known as a climax, which is the part of the story where all action kind of breaks loose. The tension that was built up during the rising action, just think of it as a rope. It kind of snaps. Everything, drama occurs, a bunch of fights happen, and all of that stuff. So the tension should also lead up to the climax, which I kind of just explained. And this is also widely regarded as the most exciting part. So for example, not another example, but I would say, I mean, when I was, I guess your guys' age, I read a lot. So the climax would be one of those parts where you're reading, your parents call you for dinner, and you're like, no, I have to finish reading this book because it's just so exciting, I can't leave it. So that would generally be the climax. Unless the writer's really good and makes the rising action really exciting, I would say that's most likely the climax. So the climax can take the form of fight scenes. This is really common just because there's a lot of action going on in fight scenes. It can also be a realization, such as, oh my goodness, I have a long lost forgotten twin sister or something like that, or even like new discoveries. Maybe I fell through a portal and somehow ended up in Wonderland, whatever. So generally just the most exciting part. So in Cinderella, this would be when she misses the clock and runs away, leaving behind a glass slipper, which is kind of the famous moment in that story. So we are now at the top and we're kind of coming down. Whoops, my notification just popped up there. So this is the falling action or resolution. There are technically 2 different types of, I guess, parts of the plot hill, but for general purposes, I usually rope them together just because rising action takes up a lot of your story. Climax is usually only a few chapters or even only a few paragraphs long. So falling action and resolution is usually tied up pretty fast. So it's kind of hard to differentiate between them 2, so I'm just going to rope them together. So this is the part in the story where the conflict is mostly or pretty much all resolved, depending on what type of book you're writing. loose ends are tied up, hanging questions are answered, and it should also show some kind of change in characters. We're going to talk more about character arcs later. But in Cinderella, this would be when the prince tries to find a girl to fit this shoe. You know, he travels all over the kingdom, all of that part of the story. Finally, she fits into the shoe, and they live happily ever after, just like any other Disney story. All right, so that's basically an overview of the plot hill. Hopefully that made sense. Please excuse my cheesy examples. I literally could not think of anything else. So next we're going to move on to characters. So the people or even things, animals, or basically the characters. Okay, I just used the word in the definition, but the people or things in your story. So there are different types of characters, just like there's different types of conflicts. Conflicts, again, there's so many, but these are the most relevant ones that we're just going to talk about. And those are the protagonists, the antagonists, the static, and the dynamic characters. I actually forgot if I have a separate slide for them, so I'm just going to run through them real quick just in case I don't. So the protagonist is, again, the main character. This is the one that your story should most likely follow. If it follows someone else that's not the main character, then that won't really be called the main character. So I guess that kind of makes sense. The antagonist is, again, the bad guy, the opposing force that's against the main character.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If the protagonist is a bad guy, would the antagonist be the good guy?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I've never actually thought about it from that perspective, but I guess if you flip it over, it really depends on the moral compass of your main character. But in general, I would say the main character is the one that your story follows the most. So if your main character is technically bad, then your antagonist in the story would be technically the morally good character, I guess, if that makes sense. So it's really from the point of view of your main character, or the person that your story follows. So hopefully that made sense. I know I tend to not make sense a lot, so if anyone has any questions, just feel free to interrupt at any time. All right, I guess moving on, a static character and dynamic characters, they're kind of self-explanatory as well. You can tell by the name of what they are. Static characters are kind of just static. They're there. They don't really do much. They're more like side characters, like a buddy to your main character, a friend. That's not really that important to the story, and they don't really change as much. A dynamic character is most likely your protagonist. Dynamic basically means that they're changing. Maybe they have a point of view or world view in the first chapter, and by the end of the book, their whole perspective on life changes. So as long as they change, they're kind of considered a dynamic character. All right, I did have a slide, so it's good that I explained it. Okay, so another hugely common question here, how many characters do I actually need in my book? So my dog is going crazy, so if you can hear that, sorry about that. So how many characters do you need? It's honestly just up to you. Most stories have one main protagonist, although there are multi-point of view stories. We'll talk about that kind of tomorrow. And some have multiple antagonists as well, but the antagonist is usually one main character or group, and it should be pretty clear to your readers who they are. So just make sure all of your characters are important. If you have 10 plus characters, your audience will get confused of who is who. I should have taken my own advice when I started writing my first book, because back then I was obsessed with naming characters. So if you ever read that book, that's why it's kind of confusing. But I added in the characters every single chapter. I had no idea why I did that. But I guess in my 9-year-old mind, I thought it was cool. But looking back now, that was probably not a great idea, because I have so many characters, I can't even keep track of who is who. So you can add as many characters as you need. In Nightingale, I pretty much only have 7 main characters, or not main characters, just characters in general. But in my book I'm writing right now, I have probably will end up with more than 10. But just make sure they're all important and they actually play a role. If they don't, just like cut them from the story altogether. All right, so like I mentioned, I'm kind of obsessed with character names. So this is also a hugely common question. How do I actually pick names for my characters? So this actually depends more on genre. Of course, like it depends on like personal preference as well, but always stay true to your genre. The most common ways are basically one, taking a common name such as Jane, Mary, John, and Bob. You can find these pretty much anywhere. The second way is to take a more unique name such as Hermione from Harry Potter. We have Quinn, Ace. If you search up unique baby names on Google, these are the type of names that will most likely pop up. And the last option is basically just to completely make up a new name, such as Katniss, Peeta, and Tris. This is most common in fantasy and dystopian. Like I mentioned, it really depends on your genre. If you're writing contemporary or realistic fiction, you probably want to use a realistic name, so you don't want to completely like make up a new name. in like contrasted to if you're writing in fantasy or dystopian, which is a world that's completely different from the one that we live in. You probably don't want to use too generic names just because it doesn't quite fit into the world. So again, depends on genre, but you can pick any of these methods to name your characters. Alright, so the next slide that I have is character templates. So we're not going to go too in-depth about this because I literally spent a whole day trying to explain this in my next class that I'll be hosting soon. More on that later. But character template is basically a profile or portfolio, whatever you want to call it, of your character, just so you can kind of keep track of who they are, and it also helps you develop their personalities. So you have your full name. This is just one I found off of Pinterest. You can find them all over the place. I make my own, but this is just like the most generic portfolio or template that you can kind of get. So you have your full name of your character, any nicknames they may have, their role in the story. It can be a hero, a friend, an antagonist, so on. The date of birth, you have their age, occupation. You can have some physical appearances. You can find face claims for them. That's one of my favorite parts of writing, just finding like people who look like my characters. Super fun. We'll talk about that more later. But these are basically character templates. You don't actually need to have these. I just find it useful to use character templates just because if you have a lot of characters, you might kind of forget what they are or their personalities as you actually get into writing. For example, if my main character has blue eyes in chapter 1, I probably don't want to say that they have brown eyes in chapter 5 and say they have green eyes in chapter 6, because in most people, your eye color doesn't generally change that much, so it's probably good to keep it consistent. So that's just kind of as a reference, so you don't have to read over your entire 5 chapters, just to kind of realize or remember what your main character's eye color is. All right, so let's see okay, I'm almost talking for half an hour. So I think this is mainly the last thing we're going to talk about today before we do an activity, and that is genres. So there are a ton of genres out there. If you don't know what genres are, I actually have no idea really how to explain it, but I guess they're kind of just like categories of books, of movies that you watch. As you read through this list, you'll probably get a general idea of what they are. So I just came up with a huge list of genres. Again, there are so many. If you want to go Google them, go ahead. It'll probably take you forever to read through them. But I compiled a basic list of genres that I most commonly see in writing, and you guys probably know what these are too. So we have contemporary fiction, also known as realistic fiction. This is like your everyday character that takes place in this world. There's no flying unicorns, no flying cars yet, although we probably will have those pretty soon in the future. So basically a character that takes place in real life. We have historical fiction, which is basically taking a fictional character, throwing them back a couple of centuries, and having them live through a historical event. We have poetry, which is, you guys know what that is. Adventure, just the main quest type of genre. We have paranormal, so zombies, if you're into that kind of stuff, this will probably be your genre. We have dystopian, so that's actually the one that I write. This one is more on the dark side. This mostly contains the weird governments that are just corrupted, and the character has to figure out a way to escape that. But if you want to go ahead and try and write in that genre, then go ahead. We have fantasy. So this one is probably the most common one that I see young writers writing in, and honestly, I can totally understand why. It's super fun. You get to build magic systems. You get to come up with all these cool animals, dragons, elves, you name it. But yeah, that's basically fantasy. You guys probably are pretty familiar with that genre by now. We have mystery, someone solving a clue. We have romance, not going to go too in depth into that. And then we have action, which is basically also kind of self-explanatory. There's just a lot of action, you know, like Superman, Marvel. I'm not into that kind of stuff that much, but I'm sure some of you guys are into that action kind of movie genre. So how do I even pick one to write, since there are so many? So I would say definitely look at your current reads. So for example, right now I'm super into dystopian, I'm super into fantasy. So obviously I'm not going to try to write a romance book because of multiple reasons. So I just looked at my current reads and I see, oh, they're mostly dystopian, they're mostly fantasy. So that's why I wrote a dystopian book, and now I'm working on a fantasy book because I generally like those genres. Also follow your head wherever you feel the most creative. I would say this one definitely applies to like most genres. If you really like fantasy, if you like magic, you probably just go for fantasy. You don't have to like stay back and try to figure out contemporary fiction. Just like wherever you feel the most creative, just go ahead and try it out. But remember, definitely always explore different genres. Maybe you'll like them, maybe you won't like them. That's okay. But you never know unless you try. Sounds like an old famous quote. All right, so yeah, we're almost done with all these sites. Okay, So my example that I used for this class is Roxy the Arctic Fox. We will revisit this on Wednesday, I believe. So I'm just going to go over the plot hill that I made for this book real fast. I guess disclaimer, I wrote this when I was, how old was I? I think I was in 5th grade or 6th grade when I wrote this book. It's your basic animal fantasy book. So again, I'm just going to go over it real fast so you guys know what it is. So when I bring it up in later classes, you guys won't get confused. So again, it's called Roxy the Arctic Fox. Don't ask me how I came up with the name. I honestly cannot remember. The genre is, I cannot pronounce that, but it's fantasy, and that word basically means that it's kind of like Zootopia. You're taking animals and kind of giving them human-like qualities and building a world for them. So my characters, I have multiple, but the main ones are just Roxy, who's the main character, the protagonist, Alaska, who is his sister, I believe. We have Kyone, which is the Ice Queen, and Kala, which is the antagonist. It's been so long since I've revisited the story, so let's see if I actually still remember what I wrote in this. All right, so this setting is in Zarsin, which is ruled by Kyone, which is Ice Queen. Fun fact, I actually researched the Ice Queen and Kyone came up. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I did do some preliminary research, surprisingly. But anyway, that's the setting. And the conflict is that Roxy gets framed by Kala, and he gets banished from the kingdom. So your basic fantasy novel. So I guess going more in depth, rising action, Kala basically gets jealous. She kills Alaska, which is Roxy's sister, because of her beauty. So I guess just basic fantasy. Kyone thinks Roxy did it and bans him from the kingdom forever. Of course, Roxy vows for revenge and starts traveling back to said kingdom. The climax is the fight scene, the generic fight scene. Roxy fights Kala until she gives up. However, before he kills her, he hears Alaska's voice and knows that she would never want him to kill somebody. And yeah, your basic Disney ending. I know, happy endings for everyone. And the resolution is that Kyone realizes that Roxy is innocent and welcomes him back, and Kala is sent to prison forever. So I know it's super generic, but it should be kind of easy to follow. There's not too many subplots, but that's basically just there as a reference. So if I bring it up like later on, that's kind of the story behind that. Okay, I lied. There's one more slide here. So here are some things to avoid, some common mistakes I often see in writing. So the first one is unrealistic scenarios. So I kind of covered this before, but if you're writing about history, there should not be flying cars. In fact, there shouldn't be cars in general, depending on like what time period you're writing in. When I was writing Diary of the Gold Rush, I did not actually think about this, and I wrote using some very contemporary names. So I didn't like go back to that time frame and use names like Sarah, Elizabeth, Catherine, like the generally like old names. I like used pretty modern names like Katrina. I think her brother's name was Caden. So that was pretty, I guess, big mistake, because when you're reading historical fiction, you probably won't see people with such modern names, if that makes sense. So another one, things to avoid is that you have all conflict and no resolution. This can be kind of hard, especially as a young writer. I tend to write so much rising action, so much conflict, and then when I actually get to ending it, I'm like, I have no idea how to do this. So I would just say focus on one main conflict. We'll talk a bit about this tomorrow, I believe. But yeah, just focus on one main conflict and figure out the ending, I would say, before you start like actually writing it, so you know where your story is going. All right, so next we are going to be doing a class activity. We have about 30-ish minutes, so this shouldn't take that long. Let's see if I can exit this. I honestly forgot what's on the next slide, so I don't want to like go forward too fast. All right, my computer is being super slow, so there's just going to be some awkward silence here. All right, so basically what we're going to be doing is the Lion King plot hill. So hopefully you guys know about the Lion King. I just picked that story or plot in general because, I mean, when I first taught this class, the second or live action movie of the Lion King just came out, so I actually watched that. So that's kind of why I picked it, but I mean, it does share some similarities with the old Lion King, so hopefully you guys are familiar with the plot. But basically what we will be doing is putting that story into a plot hill, which is what I did with my Roxy the Arctic Fox one, and kind of what we just went through with the Cinderella example. So yeah, so I have like 2 slides for that. So I guess we're just going to go through each category that I kind of pre-made. So I already filled some of them out for you guys. So the title, of course, The Lion King. The genre would be fantasy. Okay, so setting. Does anyone remember where The Lion King takes place, or like the general setting?
It's in a jungle.
It's in a jungle. All right, so I'm just gonna write jungle. I'm pretty sure they gave like a specific name, but Okay, like I'm like trying to remember.
Safari.
Safari. I'll just write that down. Oh yeah, it was the Pride Lands, I think. Yeah, honestly, I don't know. If you guys know, definitely like correct me on that. But I believe it's called the Pride Lands. But of course, there's different settings. I know character goes through the Pride Lands. He goes to a jungle. He goes to a safari or whatever. He goes to a desert. But I'm just gonna put 3 settings for now. All right. So characters. Anyone remember any of the main characters of the Lion King?
Scar. That's it.
Scar. All right. I think that's the antagonist.
There's Simba, the lion.
Yep, we have Simba, which is the main character. I'll just put that here. Anyone remember any more? I guess these are like the main characters, but let's just go for a few side ones. Just
There's like Simba's friend. I don't really remember who she was.
all right. I believe her name was Nala. So again, Simba's friend. So I'll just
Simba's dad, who I also don't know.
Simba's dad. Yeah, Mufasa. Yes, I actually remember that. Surprisingly. So again, another side character. Yeah, I don't actually classify side characters. I kind of just rope them into a general category. So we're just gonna go ahead and do that. And I believe when, I guess, one more side character, when Simba kind of runs away from the Pride Lands, he is found by a group of friends. Does anyone remember any of their names or not?
No, all I remember is Hakuna Matata.
All right, I will take that. I'll just put Hakuna Matata. I don't know how to spell that, but we can go back and figure out the names if we ever find them. All right, so, okay, characters, I guess that's it. Again, there are so many more characters. We have, again, Simba's friends. We have the other lines that are kind of semi-relevant, but for the sake of time, we're not going to list all of them out, although you could totally do that if you want to. All right, so let's go on to conflict. So let's pick the central or main conflict. Of course, in Rising Action, there's a lot of subplots which kind of have their own conflict or problem. I guess they never clarify that term. But what is the main problem or what is the main conflict in the story in general?
Scar killed Simba's dad.
Yep, so I spelled it wrong. So Scar, of course, kills Simba's dad, and I guess I actually can't remember like the exact order that the plot takes place in, but I would say that's more Rising Action / inciting incident, but definitely that's the conflict. I guess, does anyone else want to add anything?
I think Scar is trying to be the Lion King.
Yeah, so that's a great summary. I was actually just about to add that. So I'll just say Scar wants to be the Lion Kings, hence the title. So yeah, so again, central main conflict. It's usually pretty general, not very specific just because it's so broad and it's a main conflict. If you're talking specific conflicts, such as, Scar kills Simba's dad or Simba runs away and he almost dies because he's so exhausted, those would be kind of subplots or sub-conflicts. But for the main general conflict, it would be really general. So as something as easy as just Scar wants to be the Lion King would be, sufficient enough. All right, so we finished the first slide. I think we have one more with the actual plot hill. So we have exposition, rising action, and so on. All right, so let's just go one by one again. So how does the story start? What's the exposition of the Lion King? All right, cool. I guess no one wants to say anything.
Simba is born.
Yep, so we have Simba is born. I can't remember if they actually show that scene, but I think the infamous scene of him being like raised up in the whole beginning song. So I'll say Simba is presented to the animals of the Pride Lands, I believe.
And the monkey raises him and drops him off a cliff. Actually, I'm not sure of that.
Not sure if that actually happens, but I know definitely the monkey does raise him up. So I'll just say, I'll just move that here. Simba is presented by the monkey. I can't remember his or her name, but I can go add that in once my memory decides to start working again. All right, so exposition is pretty general. It's pretty basic, just introducing the characters. So let's move on to the rising action. So what's kind of the rising action of this whole story?
I think Simba and his friend Nola got bored, so they ran to the place they weren't supposed to go, where the hyenas were.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Simba and Nala explore the hyena's den. I guess it's called a den, which is actually, wait, no, I was thinking of something else. Yeah, so they go explore the hyena's den, which is probably not a good idea, but, you know, Scar kind of lies, tells them it's the elephant graveyard. So again, I guess rising action, just because it's super, you know, like spread out, it takes so much of your story. I'm just going to briefly summarize it and say Scar plots many evil ways to kill Simba and try to take the throne. So again, not super specific. I guess if you want to get more specific, you would say something like Scar tricks, you know, Simba into going to the hyena's den, which he tells them is the elephant graveyard, I believe. Or you could say something like Scar convinces Simba to go into the canyon and practice his roar, but then his dad gets killed in the stampede. So those would be more specific details, but you can rope it under a general, you know, Scar plots evil ways to kill Simba and try to take the throne, which is the main conflict. All right, so let's talk about the climax now. After all the rising action is out of the way, what is the most exciting part of this story?
Maybe when they fight.
Yeah, that's a great one. I would say most fight scenes tend to be the climax just because there's so much action going on there. So I'll just put fight scene. I don't remember how many fight scenes there are, but I guess to specify, I'll just say Simba returns to the Pride Lands and fights Scar one last time. So if you remember in both, I guess, movies that they showed the Lion King in, this is the super dramatic fight. There's fire everywhere. There's like dramatic music. So generally the climax. All right, moving on, falling action and resolution, I guess they're kind of tied together. So after all that happens, all the fight, fire, dramatic stuff happens, how does the story end, or how does it wrap up?
Simba becomes king.
Yep, Simba becomes king. I'll just say Simba becomes king or takes his place as king, technically, since he's supposed to be the king. All right, I guess following action and resolution, I kind of roped them together, but just because there's an emphasis on the circle of life, I'll just say Simba and Nala present their baby cub to the animals of the Pride Lands. I can't spell that right for some reason. Continuing the circle of life. All right. So I'm pretty sure that's a pretty good plot hole that we just made of the Lion King. Of course, we could get more specific into both the falling action, rising action, climax, and pretty much everything. But for the sake of time, we don't want to go too in depth just because it's probably going to take a while since it's a huge movie. I mean, it's like over an hour long. If you summarize everything, it's going to take a while. So we're just going to move on. Let's see if I can present that again, just so you don't have to stare at my boring tabs that are open. All right, so hopefully that made sense, just going over the plot hill. Hopefully that gave you guys a clearer vision of like what each like element of the plot hill represents. So I guess for homework, technically I'm not a fan of assigning homework or doing homework. I hate homework in general, but I would just say make sure you have your shared folder with me. There's more information about this that can be found in your parents' email that I kind of sent them a while ago. So if you aren't sure if your parents share yours with me yet, just go ask them to kind of check their email. There's more instructions there. But basically, there's just this shared drive folder. So everything that you kind of do in this class, I think the most things that you'll be doing takes place like either on Wednesday, I would say. But any assignments that you do, like homework would be will be kind of stored in that folder. So you don't have to share each document with me separately. So I can just go through in your folder and kind of see what you've been doing. So I guess the homework for today would just be to take a story or a movie that you like. It doesn't have to be one that you wrote. It can be something like The Lion King. It can be Cinderella again. It can be Snow White. It doesn't even have to be Disney. It can be pretty much any book that you like, any movie that you like, and basically organize everything in that plot into a plot hill. So kind of similar to the one that we just did. I would say either do this on Google Docs, Google Drawings, or Google Slides, depending on which one you want. You can even do it by hand if you want to. but just make sure it's in that shared folder so I can just go through and look at it. And also, if you want, you can start brainstorming your own story idea. I hope y'all were super inspired by my presentation today. So if you have any story ideas that you've been thinking of, it can be one that you've already written some things on, or if you just want to come up with a new idea, you can start brainstorming your own. And if you want to do more for all you guys overachievers, you guys can start putting your own idea also into a plot hill. So I guess that would be kind of tomorrow's homework, but I would say come up with a story idea. It can be an old one, it could be a new one, whatever, because on Wednesday we will be using that and kind of creating an animation slideshow, which is technically the funnest day, so guys can look forward to that. But that's basically an overview of tonight's, I don't know where you guys are, but for me it's tonight's homework and basic overview of what we will be doing later on in the week. So other than that, if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and ask them now. We finished a few minutes early, which is pretty rare actually. But if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. But other than that, I will see you guys tomorrow.
What time does this end?
All right, so this class technically is an hour long, but today we ended in 45 minutes. So technically it starts from 4 o'clock p.m. PST to 5. So it's an hour slot, but we might end a few minutes early.
Great, it's like 7 o'clock.
Oh yeah, I mean, you guys are in different time zones, so that's pretty interesting actually. Because for me, it's almost 5 p.m., but for you, it might be 7. So yeah.
It's almost 5 for me too. It's 4:45 in my time.
Yeah, so we're probably in the same time zone. I mean, I can see it's dark for you. I mean, it's kind of dark. The sun's starting to set for me, so probably in the same.
The sun's already set.
Yeah, I mean, you're in another time zone, so it's probably later for you. But I guess if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask. You can either just ask or type them. But otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So about that story plot thing, is it like kind of the triangle thing?
Yeah, so the plot hill would be, if you want to visualize it, it's the triangle that I kind of showed. Let's see if I can go back to that slide. Okay, I can never find it. All right, so it would technically be this one, but because I didn't really have space to draw it, I kind of just listed out.
I can only see you. I can't see your computer or you writing down earlier either.
Can everybody else see the screen, or can you just see me? All right, I think I got a thumbs up.
I can see your screen.
I can see the screen and you.
All right, so I'm not sure what it looks like on your end, but I guess if you can't see the screen, it would just be the triangle thing. All right, if anyone
Into
else.
the playoffs.
Not yet. All right, so if anyone else doesn't have any questions, I guess if you have any questions anytime, feel free to send me an email. I'm pretty much always active. But other than that, I'll see you guys tomorrow, same time, same place, or same Zoom link. And tomorrow we'll get into literary techniques. So if people say, or at least for me, my mom, when I was your guys' age, I kept a journal, and my mom always was like, your writing is not that great because I was not the best journaler. So tomorrow we'll talk about writing techniques that will basically make your writing better. But until then, I will see you later and have a good day, have a good night, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. See you guys
Bye.
tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.